Cool. So, welcome to another edition of In Convo with. This time I'm hosting Mark Ferguson, a wildlife recordist, an artist, and a swell guy. I've been talking to you on email for about a month now, just talking about batty stuff and batty related things. And since I have that, I do have a couple of episodes that I'm doing on bats. I just thought what a perfect guest it would be to host you, Mark. So welcome to the chat, Mark. How are you? Hope you're fine.
No worries. Pleasure to be here. Yeah, not too bad. A little bit tired, but otherwise good. Looking forward to having the chat about bat detecting and whatever else you'd like to talk about.
Awesome. So I'm just going to start with the first question. I always ask a lot of people kind of the same way because I'm generally interested. So how did you find yourself in wildlife, in recording the sounds of wildlife, in the art and everything? What was kind of the initial process that kind of threw you into this unique interest, let's say?
Yeah. Well, it's not like it's an unusual path. It's kind of fairly typical of people who are initially interested in music. They kind of gravitate to recording, sound recording and field recording. So that was me. So my initial path, I guess, if you want to call it a path, was as a violinist and a guitar player. So I used to play violin and guitar back in Northern Ireland. So I grew up in Northern Ireland and had a very active kind of musical life, played traditional music, traditional Irish and Scottish music and so on, and played some rock and roll, a little bit of jazz. And then I went to university. So I went to Queen's University Belfast and I did a bachelor degree in music. And about halfway through that degree, I became really interested in electronic music. So anything to do with kind of recording, synthesis, I kind of became very interested in that. So, in fact, the first time I listened to some electroacoustic music, I remember very well, it was a piece by Francois Bayle. I actually burnt a pizza in my university accommodation because I completely forgot about it. I was so absorbed with it. So that was me kind of hooked once I started listening to kind of, I guess, the sort of traditional electroacoustic music, like sort of musique concrète. People like Pierre Schaeffer and so on kind of became interested, and then eventually developed that, became interested in audio programming languages. I went to the University of Manchester, did a master's degree. That was in electroacoustic composition. So I was doing sort of multi-channel composition. Sorry, actually not at Manchester. I was doing stereo electroacoustic composition there. And then shortly after that, I got a job in the professional audio industry. So I was working for a leading manufacturer of windshields, microphone windshields and shock mounts. And then decided to do a PhD. So that's my most recent academic experience as a PhD researcher. And I pretty much for that focused on wildlife sound recording and how my own wildlife sound recordings could be used for kind of soundscape composition and electroacoustic composition. So that's my most recent sort of academic experience, and that's a very rough path to where I am today.
So what was because you mentioned, you have mentioned how you almost burned a pizza because of what you heard. So because electroacoustic composition, it's quite, I used to lecture electroacoustic composition in this private institution, but what was the part that kind of made you hooked about it? Was it just the sound process, the interests in how it basically differentiates itself from, let's say, your normal, more orthodox type classical music or, popular music? What was that thing that basically got you hooked?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And they're always, I think for everybody or most people, there's kind of a hooking point where they're really interested. For me, it was the understanding that because when you play violin and guitar and you're kind of brought up as a quote unquote musician, you're very much kind of stacked into this cultural framework of what music is and what music means, and music is described for you in the curricula at school, and it's described for you by your teachers and so on. And listening to kind of electroacoustic music and acousmatic music in particular, so pretty much anything that comes out of loudspeakers, it really opened up my ears to the fact that what was happening on the violin and the guitar was in fact sound, and you could treat it as such, and you could then therefore look at other sound sources and treat those musically. And that was the biggest realization, that other sound sources could be used quote unquote musically, that I didn't have to abide anymore by this kind of framework for, you know, kind of the sort of musical discourse that I'd been taught about.
Yeah, because you mentioned that you were like in the acoustic sphere, like with traditional, I assume traditional Celtic music, Irish music, and you know, playing the violin. Now, violin can be played in many different ways, or certain articulations and stuff like that. Have you done also like trying different, let's say, more contemporary articulations within the acoustic instruments that you used to play?
Absolutely. So that was another kind of, we talked about the kind of the hooking moment. So that was another thing that really kind of pushed me towards more experimental practice. So in Belfast, when I was doing my bachelor's degree, we had an experimental music group called the Cube Ensemble, Queen's University Belfast Ensemble, or Cube for short. And we did a lot of stuff there. We did a lot of work, works by John Zorn. Who's John Zorn? The kind of game pieces. Cobra, I believe. Cobra is one of the game pieces that he has, possibly. And so we did a lot of free improvisation, a lot of kind of, we played in art galleries and stuff like that. And, you know, everything from adding paper clips to, you know, the violin strings, preparing the violin to, you know, you name it, it was kind of experimented with. So it really, the experimentation with acoustic stuff was a nice parallel. And that, again, that kind of pushed me more towards opening my ears to soundscape composition, to acousmatic music and stuff like that. And of course, in the background through all of this, I always had a huge interest in the outdoor world. So I was really interested in hiking. I'd always loved, you know, bird watching as a kid, and had developed those skills as well. And it wasn't until, to be honest with you, it wasn't until roughly, you know, 2013, 2014, when I finally started to let those two areas, the kind of the creative aspect and the kind of the nature, the wildlife stuff, they kind of came together. And for me, like that was like the first moment was like a hooking moment for the kind of musical bit, but this was like a voila moment. You know, it was really kind of pretty cool.
Yeah, but like, was there like a specific moment that when this happened, like what was the trigger that kind of brought these two worlds together? Like your, I guess, love for the outdoors as well as, you know, the love for music and creating. How did that, like, was it a special trigger? How did that mash up?
There wasn't really like a moment where I kind of thought, yeah, I'll this is it. It was just, I just started to try stuff. You know, I thought, you know, what would happen if I put a microphone, you know, on this floor? You know, what would this honeybee sound like? So I tried that. You know, what would it sound like to record this tree? Like, what does it sound like inside the tree? So I just started thinking, and I guess this was the musical bit being applied to wildlife sound recording, is kind of like just experimentally thinking about how to record things in weird ways. So it wasn't like it wasn't like that wasn't already happening out there, because people were already doing that kind of stuff. You know, people like Jez Riley French, for example, recording fences and plants and stuff like that. But I kind of figured it out myself. It was like, okay, I want to try this. How do I do it? And I tried a few microphones, and then I eventually found the community and just kind of taught myself really about that. But
is there like a lively field recording community in the UK, or like how is it? Because you mentioned Jay, right? Jazz Radio French, right? I just got a couple of his microphones delivered, and like it is something like when you start searching for stuff, you start discovering people. Was there like a community that you know barged in, or like how?
I think initially I was looking at. I mean, I'd have to say I'm no longer on social media for a start, so that kind of shuts down a lot of the doors for the field recording community, because I wanted to ask people initially about some techniques and so on, but the discussions were always about technologies. They were always about gear. I found very little discussion about fieldcraft, about how to approach certain species, for example. It was always, hey, here's a microphone, look what I can do with this. And even during, I remember at the start of lockdown in COVID, it was a bunch of people in these forums were posting pictures themselves, like in deserted cities, and like it became the thing to do, to go and record empty soundscapes, well, not empty, but almost empty. And so I kind of as much as I enjoyed kind of dabbling in the field recording community, I kind of I'm a big fan of connecting in person. I'm a big fan of small connections and the little things, and making a small number of meaningful connections. Like with you, for example, over email, that kind of one-to-one thing. And I just became bored with the constant talk about technology, because I'd already taught myself that nobody knows everything about the technologies they're using, but I had learned enough to figure the bits and pieces out, and I became more interested in species behavior and in issues of conservation concern, because there's there are microphones and technologies on the one hand, and then there's what's happening to our planet and our species on the other hand, and it's like there's a bit of an imbalance between those two things, I would say. So a nice community, lots of good discussions, but I keep them small scale. The one group that I'm a member of at the moment is the Wildlife Sound Recording Society.
All right.
So this is probably the oldest sound recording society in existence. It's been going since the late 1960s, and we meet up in person. And a lot of the discussions there are some discussions about technology and microphones.
Of course,
yeah, always. But a lot of the discussions are about what to do with that, and that's what really interests me.
I mean, you have talked about this Wildlife Sound Association, or what's it called?
Sound Recording Society, WSRS.
Sound Recording Society. So, like, it kind of reminds me of the photographers, because I used to do some photography back in the day. I still do at times, but the thing is, it's you have like two camps. One of the camp is always, hey, I bought this lens, and have you heard about the new Sony mirrorless body? And I'm just like, show me how to take a creative picture. Show me that. And I assume that with field recording, it probably has a lot of this, like two groups, one focusing on the aspects of on the aspects of equipment, while the other focuses on the aspects of obtaining sound in interesting ways. And you have done quite a lot of wildlife recording, like reading your PhD. It told me that you, of course, know a lot about that stuff. But like, were you aware how to approach species beforehand, since you were an outdoorsman, or is this something that you have learned through the craft?
A little bit. A lot of this was self-taught, and this is the thing. There's no kind of guidebook, because it's impossible to produce a textbook about how to do these things. This is the beauty about the natural world, about wildlife, because it's so variable. It's not a concert hall situation, although there are variables in there too, of course. But it's just because it's so unrestrained and in many ways unpredictable. I just really enjoy that, and so a lot of things have been self-taught. I really enjoy just spending time in a place and figuring out all the different behaviors, and trying to predict even weather patterns and stuff like that, and how that's going to factor into the day, the recording day. So a lot of it is just independent discovery, and then again talking to a handful of people, and kind of and a lot of these people have been recording, you know, for like maybe 30 years, 40 years. So there's a treasure trove of knowledge when you connect, especially with older people in their 60s and 70s. There's an absolute treasure trove of knowledge to be tapped into there. And so I've done a lot of knowledge extraction from those people, and it's just been great. It's just learning about their lives and learning about how they do that. But yeah, a lot of it's just experimentation, really. It's the same experimental music practice. It's the same thing applied to wildlife, really.
Yeah, it's that sense of discovery and that brings us joy in a way. Was there like a particular species or a creature that was that, you know, proved to be very difficult to get a hold of, either by finding it or either by obtaining a sound from it? Yeah. Was there something do you have a story there or something maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of stories. Probably the one that sticks out for me would probably be common cuckoo. So, you know, it's probably one of the most familiar kind of birds calls or songs on the planet. And what I really wanted, so, you know, you can get a recording of a cuckoo. Not so much in the UK, actually. They're pretty hard to find in the UK at the moment. Other countries have a bit more population, but I really wanted to capture like a male cuckoo coming into land and then starting to sing. So I wanted the process. I didn't want just, you know, to suddenly record like a little snippet of its ongoing song. I wanted to record the process. This cuckoo had this sort of dream recording, like it would come into land and then the microphones would be there. So I scoped out, this recording's on my album Avian, by the way, on Bandcamp. So I scoped out a little copse of trees, part of an ancient oak wood in Dartmoor National Park in the UK. And I watched it, and I watched how the birds moved around it. And I think there were a couple of males and maybe one or two females. So I literally tried over and over again to record that, and I missed my chance with it, with the cuckoos. So I waited for an entire year for them to come back. And in the process of that year, I actually went back to the same place, and I kind of put microphone rigs out, trying to listen to the landscape and figure out like where would a good spot would be. So I kind of spent not all of the year, but a good part of it every other month, like going down there and like thinking, where would I put these microphones? So I went back the following spring, and I put them out, and I retreated back to a rock about 50, 60 meters away. And I watched through binoculars as this cuckoo, this male cuckoo, had worked its way up the valley, and it just came in and landed like just a meter or two above the microphones that I put out there. And I was like, it was just the most incredible. I mean, the experience will, I mean, it makes, you know, hair stand up on my arm when I'm describing it to. It's going to stay with me for the rest of my days, that experience, just being on that rock, knowing that I had, you know, I was watching this behavior, I was listening to it, and knowing that I had this little window, these two microphones just kind of underneath it, and that, you know, I was going to get something special there. And that was just, you know, that was an unforgettable moment, that one.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Amazing. Just for all my synth lovers, viewers and listeners, we're not talking about the famous YouTuber Cuckoo. We're talking about an animal here. But Mark, you have mentioned like how this took you more than a year to obtain a sound. So I guess this is right. Like, would you consider wildlife recording as being like this prolonged process of trying different ways in order to get it? Because like coming from studio recording, such a lot of our viewers and listeners is just like, you know, you mostly just screw around for an hour until you get something cool, right? But like going out and trying to obtain that perfect recording, I assume takes far more time.
Yeah, well, it depends how fussy you are. Is it in the studio? You know, I guess like you know, Curtis Rhodes, famous kind of micro sound guy. He spent years putting compositions together. So, but no, there's this kind of like well-established thing about wildlife sound recording that you need bucket loads of patience. You need to wait like, 4 days and days just to get something. And a certain percentage of it, absolutely, like maybe 30-40% of it is that way. There are lots of in between, like another 30-40% in between, but you can get a lot of stuff just on the fly. It's not like, and this is the part of the thing, people think you have to be some kind of kind of stoic, sort of almost Zen-like person to be a wildlife sound recorder, but that's not the case, because you can go out into your back garden and get some cool stuff. I've recorded black garden ants in my very pitiful small garden here in the UK. And they've been really cool recordings. And, so you don't have to have this kind of insane level of patience to do it, but it does help. It definitely helps. It's that kind of craft, I guess.
So you have mentioned black ants, or like
black garden ants.
Black garden ants. So it's I assume you put some contact microphones on the anthill, or like how's the process?
No, a couple of mini omnis. These things, they have these huge colonies underneath the lawn, underneath the grass and the paving stones and so on. So once you kind of figure out where they're going, and in summertime they'll pick a day, usually one day in the year, and they'll all kind of come out flying. The males would be like a mating kind of flight. So that's what I recorded. And if you know where the entrances are to their colonies and so on, you can kind of get the microphones ready. If it's going to be like a really warm, humid day with hardly any wind, that's usually the day they will pick to come out. Just a couple of omnis, and I literally just put them at the entrance point, where they would emerge. And I even put them amongst the grass, because there were thousands of these things and they just were crawling through all the grass blades. And it's great. I get some beautiful low frequency, you talk about synthesized stuff. This was much better. This is really beautiful low frequency drones and kind of
biothermology, I guess. I do have like I have a person that I know that basically studies biothermology, and he also is dwelling into sound art and sound recording, but he uses vibrometers, a little laser pointed at the ground to get these vibrations. And like there's a whole new world that I never actually thought about, which basically like brings me to my next point. Doing a lot of bat recordings myself now, just starting out with this, I'm intrigued how much I actually am throwing myself into the knowledge or into the discovery of species, of how they function, in what way, basically reading up on something that I'm assuming that a lot of people that are more into audio and stuff won't necessarily go there, but like it is an interesting addition to that. So have you found yourself in a similar situation, just like when going to record a species or thinking about that? Is it something that you read a bit about, or is it something that you learn through experience? What's the...
Usually, I usually spend time if I'm going to record a certain bird, for example, I'll spend time reading about it. I'll spend time reading about the species. So I'm a bit of a reader. I spend a lot of time reading about species, and just find it really interesting to kind of recap on their songs, on their calls and stuff like that, and figure out how they operate. So I've got like a bunch of textbooks and kind of accounts of natural history accounts and so on. I spend a lot of time reading them. Absolutely. Do
you feel that there's a difference there when you listen to a beautiful bird song, like with your own ears, and then when you listen to the recording? Because I'm assuming because of the amplification that the recording has, and because we do hear differently through the microphone, right? So I'm assuming there's a difference in experiencing that as well, right? Do you feel like there's a difference?
Yeah, I think that the actual experience itself will always be better than the recording. It's really so hard to replicate the full kind of sensory experience with just a recording, because there's the olfactory aspect, the kind of smell, the kind of even just the sensation of touch, walking through woodland, grabbing branches and stuff like that. the feel of the wind against your face. I really wish that I had some of that at the moment, because it's like almost 25, 26 degrees in this room. The sun is streaming through. So the sensations that you experience in the field recording, it's important to remember that a sound recording is only one aspect of that. It's never going to completely cover all of the different facets of the human experience and the emotional experience as well. But it does. I think there's a certain power with sound that brings you back to that more than other kind of media. For me, there's a parallel with field recording, with the photography aspect, the kind of the sound image, if you will. But there's something about the sonic experience, especially because you have to experience it through time by default. Yeah, it's a temporal experience. You have to listen to it. You have to devote your mind and body to it for a set period. Because of that, it has the power to bring back these sensations, and I've had moments where I'm listening back to, a dawn chorus, and I remember the smells, I remember the sensations of being there, and that's really cool.
So it's really almost cool. Like creating a personal sonic album. Just
it is, yeah.
Remember that, right? I asked you about listening, how it's different through microphones. And how we vibe with it differently. So I guess it's probably a right time just to ask you, what was your what was the first experience when you heard a bat through a bat detector? Because it was wonderful for me, so I'm assuming it must be for you as well.
Yeah, I know. First proper experience was in a place called Arlingham, which features on my Walking with Bats album. But I have the detector here, so this is the first detector that I got. Peterson DT40X. Yeah, so really good one to start with. I was just using it in heterodyne mode, and it was just the classic 45 kilohertz common pipistrelle situation, and it was immediately it was like another experience, like kind of another hooking moment where I was suddenly addicted to these rhythmic pulses, and the rhythmic aspect, the rhythmic qualities, I'm sure you've noticed this, are just incredible with bat echolocations and social calls. Their melodic aspect as well, if you listen to time expanded calls, but the rhythmic aspect of the heterodyne recordings in particular, the detections rather, are pretty astonishing. They're very cool. So what's
your favorite bat species echolocation in the UK? I'm assuming
that's a tricky one.
Yeah.
It's basically, I've done some bat detecting in Poland as well, because I have family connections there. But most of my bat detection has happened in three places: Northern Ireland, England, and Poland. To be honest with you, one of my favorite echolocations, so not social calls, but echolocating bats, would be the lesser horseshoe bat, because it's the only species of horseshoe bat that I've managed to successfully record. Recorded a little snapshot of the greater horseshoe bat as well, actually for the first time, again, when I was recording the Walking with Bats album. But I just love that Doppler shift, that kind of echolocation style that they have. It's really, really interesting, and it's such an intelligent way to find your way around, actually, just using Doppler shift, using frequency differentials.
So if you would, can you just explain, because you're probably going to explain it way better than I could, for the listeners. So we know that listening to, let's say, pipistrelle species, Myotis species, you would get this little percussive claps in your heterodyne detection. However, when going to horseshoe bats, there's a very distinctive difference. It's almost melodic in a way. It just kind of goes up and down. How would you explain, maybe to our viewers or to our listeners, in what way? How do horseshoe bats actually echolocate differently?
It's so they produce actually through their noses mostly. They produce an echolocation. It's like at a constant frequency, pretty much, and they have an interestingly shaped sort of, I think it's nose leaf. They can focus the sound in various directions, and they produce this constant frequency, and they're able to listen to the difference in frequency caused by Doppler shift through sort of motion and speed difference. They're able to listen to the reflected frequency and understand how to navigate through that system. So by understanding how much the frequency is varied, and they can even pick up fluctuations in that constant frequency that they've emitted, so they can tell if something's wings are moving, for example, they can tell that's sort of modulated in a certain way as well. So they can basically navigate through that effect, that Doppler effect, and understanding how that's affected their emissions, the frequency emissions. They can also compensate for their own speed. I'm not too sure if they can compensate for the speed of the insect as well, but they can compensate for their own speed by varying slightly the frequency that they produce. So it's always at a constant. They can always receive it, basically. That's a very poor explanation of it, but it's kind of a very rough explanation.
Yeah, I mean, it just sounds amazing. It just sounds wacky, really.
It's very cool. Yeah. But if you're listening with a heterodyne detector, you'll hear like a bunch of almost like warbles around that sort of frequency. So 111 kilohertz would be the frequency for that species, and you'll hear like it's almost like a
little whistle in a way, right? Yeah. You have mentioned that you recorded bats in the UK, Ireland, and Poland. Is there a would you say like there's a difference in timbre? Have you noticed a difference in timbre when you go to, let's say, different locations within the same species? Like, because you're listening to enough of heterodyne detection when you're detecting bats, your ears become accustomed to certain species. Like, especially if you understand, you would understand that pipistrelles have a different timbre than, let's say, Myotis species and stuff like that. But have you maybe noticed any differences when it comes to regional? Because your ears are way more accustomed than mine are. So.
There are. I mean, probably the biggest, for me, the biggest difference would be between Nethusius pipistrelle bats. So this is a species of bat. It's quite hard to record in the UK. It's a migratory species that travels sometimes many thousands of 1,000 or a couple of thousand of miles even on migration. But in Northern Ireland, there is a resident population of Nethusius pipistrelle, as well as some migrant populations which go back and forth. And they have very, very variable social calls amongst individuals, amongst males. So the males will use that for obviously agonistic things, so if they're fighting or territorial stuff, but they'll also use it for obviously attracting females. And there can be big differences sometimes between their social calls in the field. I haven't really recorded too many examples, but listening to some examples from others, it's quite apparent. But really. There are variations. If you take something like common pipistrelle and soprano pipistrelle, for example, there's like a crossover point around 50 kilohertz where it's hard to separate those two species. They can both echolocate close to that that zone. So there are variations, but you have to really be very experienced, spend a lot of time in the field to pick up on them. Absolutely.
Have you maybe noticed? So I was watching. I don't know. You probably know Wildlife Acoustics I'm assuming as a company, right? And they had they do this like little video seminars about different fields in the bioacoustic spheres, and they had like a seminar about bat social calls. So you had like Middleton as a person as a guest and something like that, and as well as this person that basically said that within some studies, bats do have their own songs, which is a weird way of saying it, because songs are usually attributed to, let's say, birds or whales or I don't know. So I haven't heard about bat songs. So would you say that what's your opinion on this particular topic? That's quite interesting.
Well, the bat calls, it's an interesting question, but the social calls that they produce are sometimes described as songs, really. And they are essentially songs to attract females from a male standpoint. But they can only be identified as such if we slow them down and listen to them through time expansion. So that's a different process from heterodyne detection. So we can listen to them by slowing down the recording, and we can listen to the frequencies and maybe by a factor of 10 or 20. It's amazing to think that the bats are actually distinguishing those in real time. It's hard to even understand how they're processing that internally. But the social calls of bats, we could kind of describe in a way as a song, I suppose. Some of the recordings of those are quite beautiful, and especially if you stretch them out by a factor of 20 or even sometimes 40, you can hear all the melodic contours of that. So just as a side note, obviously this is different from the echolocation, which is a series of pulses designed to be listened to and to understand the environment. So these social calls are used for behavioral purposes, so attracting a mate or fighting, pretty much, or announcing your presence.
Going through because how many years are you recording bats for now?
It's probably 2020 would have been the start for me. 2020, so start of lockdown. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm assuming that every spring there's a new season that opens up for you.
I mean, some bats will be active occasionally throughout the winter. Like on a winter's day, if it's warm, you might get the odd noctule coming out to hunt, to stock up on food. But really, from for me, April, especially May onwards, you'll get that. For me, that's the start of bat season proper. Really, and all the way through September, October, there's a lot of mating activity happening, then a lot of social advertising stuff going on, and then once you get to November, it's kind of tails off, and then it's hibernation time in the UK anyway. And so there's a definite season. With birds, with avian species, you can start to record the winter species. So, for example, fieldfare, redwing, all the wildfowl come into the UK for winter.
Robin,
spectacular.
I'm assuming.
Well, robins, you can hear robin almost any time of the year. There's always a robin somewhere. But the wildfowl species in particular will come in. So you can kind of space out your year and record that way. But with bats, in the UK anyway, there's a definite UK and Ireland. There's a definite season for to be aware of.
So because you probably recorded I'm assuming thousands of different echolocation social calls and stuff similar to that. What would be, have you recorded anything that sounded that you were, because I assume that you obviously get quite accustomed to, that's atypical common pipistrelle echolocation or atypical horseshoe bat. Is there any time that you feel completely flabbergasted what you have just captured when you're listening back to it, either in heterodyne or then later through post-processing and slowing down the recordings?
Yeah, I mean, so bat detection, there are a number of species that are really difficult, even still for artificial AI kind of algorithms to figure out. And that would be particularly the Myotis species, so the species that are part of the Myotis genus. So things like whiskered bat or Brandt's bat or Bechstein's, those three in particular, produce very, very, very similar echolocations that even experts can be completely flabbergasted, like biological researchers, as to what they've recorded. And the thing to be aware of, Andy, is that so we're dealing with really high frequencies here, and high frequencies attenuate in air very, very substantially, so they reduce. And because of that, one of the key kind of identifiers for these species is the starting frequency, so what frequency they'll start at when they're sweeping down with the pulse. And because with various atmospheric conditions or various kind of features, like vegetation features, it's very difficult sometimes to understand exactly what the start frequency is. So even if you do get a perfect recording, it might not necessarily be representative of an ideal recording of that species under laboratory conditions. So it's a minefield of identification sometimes with myotis species. And so to the point that a lot of people, even very experienced people, will just identify if they have like a checklist of what species they've encountered in the field. They might just write myotis species, or they might put brackets, likely, narrow it down to 2 or 3. But those 3 in particular, Brandt's, Bechstein's, and whiskered bat, are very difficult to record. Myotis bechsteini, Myotis brandti, and Myotis mystacinus, I think, for those.
I assume that there's also the question of the environment or the foraging environment as well, because like they do change their echolocation calls based on whether if it's an open area or an open pasture versus, let's say, a cluttered forest. Absolutely, right? So there's a difference there as well. So are you doing identifications as well? Like, are you going back, throwing it into a sonogram and just basically trying to figure out if that was that which you have thought that it was in the field?
Yeah, once you get to a certain point, so there's heterodyne detecting, and that can take you so far, and then there comes a point where you have to get you have to make some full spectrum recordings. So you'll go out with a detector, and the one that I use has a sample rate, I think, up to something like 700 kilohertz, something ridiculous. So I use it about 500 because that's enough, and you can then have the full picture. You have a really beautiful quality kind of overview of what this echolocation was, or the social call was, and then you can take it back and put it into a spectrogram and have a look and figure out. And it's much easier. It's in combination with your heterodyne observations and those analyses. Then it's easier to identify them. Not necessarily easy, but easier to get to the bottom of what you've recorded.
Are you collaborating with any bat experts in your area, or like your local bat groups?
So throughout the UK, there are lots of bat groups. They're kind of like a very important part of bat conservation here. I'm not actually a member of one. It's a bit of a lone wolf, and I could be. It's just a matter of time. That's the main reason. But no, the album that I released, Walking with Bats, that was done not in collaboration with the Bat Conservation Trust, but they promoted it, and Bat Conservation International promoted it. And a lot of the questions that I had initially about species and so on, and how to go about detecting, they would answer for me. And so we have these organizations, and they're very happy to help with people who are just starting out recording. So it's pretty cool to have that.
Yeah, for those that don't know, Walking with Bats is one of the releases that Mark made, and it's a brilliant work. This was my introductory to your work, and to basically, it's like a little lovely sonic encyclopedia of how it is like to go bat walking, basically, to go out in the field detecting bats. So I really urge people that are interested in this to go listen to that. But Mark, let's just give a focused bit to this particular release. What is the initial idea of Walking with Bats? What did you want it to showcase there? Like, is it something to bring people closer to this craft, let's say?
Yeah, I think, well, the number one reason, and I'm not saying this just for the street cred, the number one reason for doing all this to me is just because, we need to do it. I feel there's a conservation aspect to this. A lot of these species are under threat. And, I speaking as a father, there's no point in doing this stuff if it's not going to be there in 20, 30 years. I mean, what's the point? It's pointless. So that's reason number one, followed closely by enjoyment, of course. But the second reason for this particular album was I became a bit frustrated when I was bat detecting, and I realized when I started detecting there was kind of no guide to using a heterodyne detector. Like there was no experiential guide like that you could kind of go back to and say, oh yeah, that's what that's like, or that's what that sounds like. And what does it sound like to be in the field? And can there be somebody there explaining what they're doing? So I couldn't find any album like that kind of guided you through bat detecting. At least I didn't come across it, and I'd spent a long time looking for it. And there were like little bits and pieces, but nothing, kind of no like resource. So I just said, you know what, I'm going to put something out there that's like some kind of reference for this that people can go to. What is bat detecting? What does it sound like? Oh yeah, that's what it sounds like. So that was the concept, to put an album out there that guided people through that and kind of give people a sense of being in the field with a bat detector, basically. So that was the concept.
Have you gotten any, let's say, have you gotten any thoughts about it, like from people that are not into bats or have never tried that and just listening to that work? Have you gotten any feedback? Which I assume were positive, of course.
It's been really positive, and as a guy who's not on social media, I've been inundated with emails instead. And it's been really heartwarming, because I had one lady who got in touch, and she said, like, thank you so much for doing this. This has become a real comfort listen to me. Like, it's just something I really go to cheer me up. I was like, that's really cool.
It is comforting, yeah.
Yeah, must be the subtle Northern Irish accent.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, just little claps all around. Yeah, it's a wonderful listen.
But like, and then people like John Ross got in touch. The guy he's written some books on bat as well. Like I have so many people. You've got it. I've got the same one. Yeah. That's a good book. I had a lot of researchers who got in touch with me and told me that this is really, really cool work, and it sounds like being on a bat walk. And I was really overwhelmed by the responses that I got, and like literally people directly contacting me saying that they really enjoyed it. And so for me, it was a big success. Yeah. But the main success for me was that it raised a lot of awareness about the species. And again, like it's wildlife sound recording. I'm not filling stadiums here. So it's like just the fact that people listen to it, and it raised awareness. And it's like, if it does that, then I'm over the moon about it. So
because you have mentioned raising awareness, which I think is of course the primary reason why some of the field recordees or bioacousticians or people that are generally in the environment plus art crafts, it is like raising awareness. But I guess my question here is also this, and I prepared this as a final question to this series of interviews, or interview here specifically. So do you think, like, because you're coming from an artistic background as well, do you think art is an important part of ecology?
Absolutely, yeah, 100%. It's funny. I'm actually doing an exhibition at the moment of it's kind of an offshoot of this album. So it's looking at how we document sounds and how we write about wildlife sounds. So I've produced these typewritten sheets where I reflect on my experiences in the field and stuff like that. So I'm going to have it available to look at on Flickr soon, the exhibition. But on one of those sheets, I have these little reflections around the gallery. And in one of them, I put that I was talking about cave paintings, like the earliest representations of species, the earliest artistic, some of the earliest artistic outputs in the history of humanity. And I kind of wrote on that sheet that in many respects, the people who were painting bison and horses and so on those cave walls and cave ceilings were also in some respects the first scientists, because both disciplines share observation as a common theme. And so people talk about science and good data and good art, good data and good research and stuff like that. And I love science, and it's just, I'm 100% behind it. Brilliant. But, you know, we've had good data about climate change, about global warming, about all these different elements for decades. And not a lot of people have acted on it. People are starting to act, obviously, in a big way, but could have been done sooner.
Yeah.
And if you want to make people care about something, there's a message to be conveyed, and the people who are in the perfect position to convey that message are artists, are creative practitioners in collaboration with scientists, and not just artists, historians, geographers. It doesn't matter who. We need all these disciplines out on the table to solve. I feel to solve the world's problems in a unified, like a holistic way, because that's the only way we're going to do it. And so, does it mean something to ecology, to scientific research for artists to be involved? Absolutely, because it doesn't matter where you go, what scientific idea you have to portray it to the wider public, to humanity. Whether it's the James Webb Space Telescope, which has produced some amazing images of the universe, but you have people describing how that works with graphical illustrations and so on. Scientific textbook, a representation of planets, a graphical illustration of that, to fire the imagination. And so I feel that's the role of the artist, or one possible role of the artist and the creative practitioners, to fire people's imaginations and to get them on board with other stuff as well. So yeah, I'm proud to be a part of that. To be honest, it's good fun.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, it was brilliant what you just said. I would just end the interview here then, because it's like a lovely little bombshell. But yeah, I do agree. It's about the emotions that are in the message, and how this message is then conveyed through the emotion to a person that may not be either interested in data or either interested in pure logistics or pure numbers. So yeah,
and I should say, I want to add just briefly to that. I mean, there's the protest aspect of kind of making people aware. You can kind of go in for full-on protests and sort of peaceful protests, obviously, but there's so many grey middle areas that people pay attention to, and so again, the creative practitioner is perfectly placed to look at those and to plant little ideas and to explore that, because there's so many middle roads, moderate, semi-moderate, and then there's the people who are really kind of putting the reputation on the line out there, actually protesting. So there's everything in between as well, and we need all of these different approaches as well, I think, to manage that.
Brilliant. Mark, if people want to find you or want to get in touch with you, what would be the best way?
Cool. Well, I've got my albums on Bandcamp, but I have a central Linktree page, so it's linktr.ee/Fergusonic. Right. I had to take that name.
Of course.
So it's just my surname Ferguson with IC at the end, Fergusonic. So that's the easiest way to do it. And I'm on Bandcamp. I've got links to my albums, and maybe you'll include those, and then SoundCloud as well. So those are the three main portals. But if you get to my Linktree, that'll take you to wherever you need to go. Definitely.
Amazing. Mark, thank you so much for taking the time and for having a chat with me. It was an absolute pleasure.
Yeah,
so
my pleasure.
Thank you, and have a great one. Cheers.
Yeah. Cheers.